Hello, everyone. If you live and work in Canada, you know that the tax system is just a fact of life. But have you ever really stopped and wondered where this massive, complicated web of rules actually comes from? Well, today that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to pull back the curtain and make sense of it all.
Now, before we really get into the weeds, I just want to note that this explainer was prepared by Dr. Samir Adrashani with AI support. It's all designed to give you a really clear, accurate picture of a system that, let's face it, impacts every single one of us.
You know, if you've ever found yourself staring at a tax form, just totally bewildered, thinking, where on earth did they come up with this rule? Trust me, you are not alone. It can feel like you've been handed a puzzle with a million pieces and no picture on the box.
But what if I told you that the entire sprawling foundation of Canadian income tax law really just boils down to three sources? That's it, just three. We're going to call them the three pillars. And once you understand them, the whole puzzle starts to look a lot less confusing.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by framing the puzzle itself. Then we'll dig into each of our three pillars: statute law, common law, and international treaties. After that, we'll look at who actually puts these laws into practice day to day, and we'll finish up with the key takeaways you really want to remember.
Okay, let's jump in. You know, with any puzzle, the first thing you have to do is understand what the pieces actually are.
So, here's the most important thing to get your head around right at the start. There isn't one single giant book of tax law. It's not that simple. It's more like a living, breathing system where different sources of authority all interact with each other. Sometimes they even clash. And knowing what these sources are is the absolute key to understanding the whole thing.
All right, let's get to our very first pillar, statute law. You can think of this as the official written rule book. It's the foundation that everything else is built on top of.
So, what is statute law? Well, it's the actual legislation, the laws, passed by our elected officials in Parliament and in provincial legislatures. It's the primary, foundational text. If tax were a game, this is the official rulebook.
Now the big one, the heavyweight champion of federal statute law, is the Income Tax Act. And let me tell you, it is a beast. It's incredibly long, and it's famous for being really, really complex. What's wild is that our system is a self-assessment system, which means the law puts the responsibility squarely on your shoulders to read this complex act and figure out how much you owe. And to make things a little simpler, almost every province just piggybacks on the federal act for their own taxes, making only a few small changes.
Okay, so what happens when that massive, complex rulebook, the Income Tax Act, isn't clear? Or what if it's totally silent on a really important question? Well, that's where the courts get involved, and that brings us to our second pillar.
This is common law, or what you might hear called case law. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's law made by judges. See, when taxpayers and the government disagree on what a rule in the Income Tax Act actually means, they take their fight to court. And the decisions those judges make, from the tax court all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, they become binding precedents. They become part of the law themselves, clarifying the rules for everyone else down the road.
And here is a fantastic real-world example of why common law is so critical. The Income Tax Act says that business income is 100% taxable, but a capital gain is only 50% taxable. I mean, that is a huge difference in your tax bill. But here's the catch. The Act never actually tells you how to tell them apart. It's completely silent on the definition. So how do we know the difference? Well, it's because of decades of court cases of common law where judges have created the legal test to distinguish one from the other. So if your job is to flip houses, that profit is business income. But if you sell the family cottage that you've owned for 20 years, that profit is a capital gain. You will not find that rule written in the Income Tax Act. It exists entirely because of Pillar 2, the common law.
Let's move on to our third and final pillar, international treaties. You know, we live in a globalized world. Money, business, ideas, people, they all cross borders effortlessly. And our tax system has to be able to handle that.
So international tax treaties are basically formal contracts between Canada and other nations. Their main purpose is to sort out any tax issues that pop up when money or business crosses a border. They're like a global rulebook designed to make sure things are predictable and, most importantly, fair.
Here's a perfect everyday scenario. Imagine a software company in Vancouver hires a freelance marketer who lives in Paris. Okay, so under Canadian law, the Vancouver company might need to withhold tax on that payment. But under French law, that marketer has to pay tax on all her income in France. So what happens? Without a treaty, she could get taxed twice on the exact same money. It's totally unfair.
This is where the Canada-France tax treaty comes in. It acts like a referee. It has specific rules that determine which country gets the primary right to tax that income, solving the problem of double taxation.
And you really need to understand how powerful these treaties are. Their main job is to avoid double taxation, for sure. But here's the kicker. If there's ever a conflict between a rule in one of these international treaties and a rule in our very own Income Tax Act, the treaty wins. Every single time. The international agreement literally overrides our own domestic law. That's how important they are.
So we've got our three sources, our three pillars of the law. But who are the people who actually write this stuff and then enforce it every day?
Well, there are two main players you need to know about. Think of it this way. The Department of Finance is the architect. Their job is to design and write the statute law, the Income Tax Act itself. Then you have the Canada Revenue Agency, or the CRA. They're the administrators. They take the law that finance wrote, and their job is to interpret it, apply it, and collect the tax from all of us.
Now, because the law is so incredibly complex, the CRA doesn't just keep its opinions secret. To help all of us out, they actually publish their interpretations of the law. They put out these documents, like income tax folios and information circulars, which you can find right on their website, that explain how they plan to apply the rules.
Okay, listen closely, because this is probably one of the most empowering things you can know as a Canadian taxpayer. The CRA's interpretation of the law is just that. It's an interpretation. It is not the law itself. It's their internal policy, yes, but if you disagree with their take on a rule, you have the absolute right to challenge them in court, where a judge, not the CRA, gets the final word. The CRA's opinion is never the end of the road.
Phew, we have covered a lot of ground. So let's take a moment and put all of these puzzle pieces together one last time.
So here it is in a nutshell. Pillar 1, statute law. That's your official written rule book. Pillar 2, common law. That's the judicial referee who steps in to clarify the rules when they're fuzzy. Pillar 3, international treaties. That's the global rule book that makes sure things are fair across borders and can even trump our own laws. And finally, you have the CRA, who applies all these rules. But remember, their interpretation can always be challenged.
And why does any of this really matter to you? Because knowledge is power. Knowing where the rules actually come from, knowing that it's a system with checks and balances, is the first real step away from feeling overwhelmed and toward navigating the entire tax system with real confidence.
So, I'll leave you with this one final thought to chew on. As our world keeps changing, with things like cryptocurrency, a global remote workforce, and digital services that don't care about borders, which of these three pillars, the written statutes, the court decisions, or the international treaties, which one do you think is going to face the biggest test? Something to think about. Thanks so much for tuning in.